You will continue to live in the Honor Guard barracks. However, you will no longer report to any of the Honor Guard functions. Instead, you will report directly to me, the head of the Public Affairs Office, and I report directly to the Secretary of Defense. While the Marine Corps Major gave instructions to the new crew of Pentagon tour guides, I eyed the stack of 70-page handbooks perched on the corner of his desk. Would I ever be able to learn everything printed in that book? I'd applied and been accepted in the special training program for Pentagon tour guides. For the next 2 weeks, you will walk the halls of the Pentagon to familiarize yourself with the different military corridors. When you lead the tours, you will walk backwards, so you'll have memorized the building layout. Backwards? The Major anticipated my thoughts. You walk backwards so that you can keep eye contact with the guests. We wouldn't want any unauthorized personnel wandering through sensitive areas of the complex. And don't worry, the Pentagon staff know that they must stay out of your way, not the other way around. The Pentagon tours began during President Carter's term in 1976 for the country's bicentennial celebrations. They proved to be so popular that the government continued them. There were 3 tours, one for the general public, one for high school and political science students, and a third for visiting presidents and honored dignitaries from other countries. I would need to become familiar with all 3. One corridor honored all those who'd received the Congressional Medal of Honor and other wartime medals. Next came the Time Life Art corridor, where paintings and photographs taken during battles of World War II were displayed. Other corridors honored the 5 branches of the military. I liked the Commander-in-Chief corridor the best. This one contained paintings of all the United States presidents and photographs highlighting their respective presidencies. I began collecting trivia on the presidents, little known facts that would bring my presentations to life for the tourists. Because of my innate interest in American history, I became known as Mr. Trivia among the other tour guides. One day I escorted some political science majors from one of the DC area colleges on the appropriate tour. As with most groups, the students found it fascinating that I could walk backwards and talk at the same time. In empty hallways where there were no exits and nothing of interest to talk about, I usually turned around and walked forward. At one point that morning, we entered such a hallway, and I spotted Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North and his secretary, Fawn Hall, coming in our direction. Since the 2 of them had been appearing before Congress regarding the Iran-Contra hearing, and they'd been interviewed on every network television news show, I knew the students would immediately recognize them. What could I do? I glanced about for alternate directions to take my tour. There were none. I'd have to bluff it. I took a deep breath, casually turned around, and walked forward, stepping up the pace as if there were nothing of interest in that area of the building. I continued walking and talking until I was certain North and Hall had reached their destination. Then I turned around to continue my lecture and found myself totally alone. North, Hall, and 70 college students had vanished into the bowels of the Pentagon. I panicked, dashing down one hallway after another. Finally, I found my political science majors badgering Oliver North and his secretary with questions. Regaining my composure, I checked to be certain that all my lost sheep were accounted for. Then, adding a touch A military command to my voice, I herded them back down the corridor. The students gave me top grades for the tour, but I fear Oliver North and Fawn Hall wouldn't have been so generous. Mr. Trivia didn't always score so well. One VIP tour included the Chancellor of East Germany and his entourage. When I took him through the hallway with the World War II photographs, I pointed out with pride one photo taken of the largest bombing mission over Berlin during the war. A cloud passed over the faces of the Chancellor's security men and the United States Secret Service men appointed to protect the dignitary. The Chancellor leaned close to the picture, then pointed at a badly scarred building in one corner. By the way, he said, during the bombing you described, my father was killed in that building right there. The President's honor guard fills two posts at the Pentagon, tour guiding and sentry duty. My friend John was assigned to sentry duty. His job was to stand at the door to the office of the Secretary of Defense with a loaded .38 revolver on his hip. As we prepared for our new assignments, John brought up the possibility of having to shoot someone. Both of us cringed at the thought of actually killing a person, even though we'd taken a vow to do so if necessary. John's problem remained theoretical until the morning we hurried into the Pentagon's service personnel entrance by the Potomac River. Since I'd overslept and missed breakfast, I told John I wanted to grab a bite at the cafeteria before heading to the guard room. Want to come? I invited. John glanced at his watch. Can't. I go on duty in just a few minutes. We rode the escalator to the second floor and split. I hurried toward the cafeteria, and John turned left toward Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberg's office. Neither of us was aware that a young white male, upset over the United States withdrawal of various trade restrictions on South Africa, had entered the building through the south entrance, intent on assassinating the Secretary of Defense. He carried a loaded .45 revolver. The security guard asked to see the man's identification. The protester reached into his pocket as if to retrieve his wallet, then suddenly darted through the metal detector. He may have figured that, with any luck, he'd make it up to the Defense Secretary's office before being killed. The metal detector sounded. The guard shouted for him to stop. He leaped onto the escalator. On the second floor in front of the secretary's door, John stood poised, gun leveled at the next person to come off the escalator. I was on my way to the cafeteria when I heard shots. Oh no, John's been shot, I screamed to myself, running toward the secretary's office. Instead of jumping onto the up escalator, the gunman had jumped onto the down escalator, so it impeded his efforts in trying to go up. I rounded the corner just in time to see one of the guards shoot the intruder as he was stepping off the escalator at the top. He tumbled down the steps, coming to rest at the security guard's feet. Get back! Get back! I shouted at the gawking office workers who hung over the stair railings. The guard at the foot of the stairs shouted, Can anybody turn off the escalator? Later, John and I talked. How could that gunman have made such a stupid mistake as to leap onto the wrong escalator? John mused. A few seconds later, I would have had to shoot him. I nodded in agreement. God tells us not to worry. He has everything under control. Occasionally, fractions of seconds can make the difference between success and disaster, guiding a tour of senior citizens through the Time Life Art Corridor. I noticed that the office door of the sergeant major of the Army stood open. I warned my tour members, be very quiet as we pass the door to the office of the sergeant major of the United States Army. The sergeant major is working inside. I waved my arm in the direction of the door, just in time to connect with a cup of coffee in the sergeant major's hand. My tour members gasped. I whirled about in panic as the hot liquid drenched the front of the startled sergeant major's shirt and pants. Grabbing a handkerchief from the hands of one of the alert tourists, I tried to wipe at the stain on the man's shirt. So sorry, sir. That's all right, Airman. I guess you were so worried about keeping quiet for the Army Sergeant Major that you ran into the Sergeant Major of the Army. Don't worry. I have another shirt in my office. The officer walked into his office and closed the door. Somehow I made it through that tour and the next. As I prepared to leave at the end of the day, I received a note from the office of the Sergeant Major of the Army. The note commended me for my exceptional conduct as a tour guide. It never mentioned the spilled coffee. During my Pentagon tour, I met and became friends with Tom, a United States Marines tour guide. We'd each been there only a short time when we learned that a new person was joining our staff. Erica. It would be my job to train her as a tour guide, and Tom's tasked to familiarize her with the Pentagon layout. From the beginning, Tom and I made up our minds to win Erica's affections. We made a bet as to which of us she would date first. Erica caught on quickly to her good fortune. All she would have to do was say, I'm so thirsty, and Tom and I would race to see who could fetch her a drink first. Or she'd coo, I forgot to bring lunch money, and we'd both bring back a lunch from the commissary. We eagerly fulfilled her every wish, spending time and money sending her flowers and candy. First, she'd act as though she preferred me, then it would be Tom, then me again. She had our heads spinning. On the third weekend, Erica announced that she had a visitor coming to see her. The visitor turned out to be her fiance, the woman who played us both for fools. Fortunately, it didn't damage the friendship between Tom and me. My first 6-month tour of duty at the Pentagon ended. I knew I'd missed my time there. On the last day of our appointment, duty sergeant called all the honor guards together. Gentlemen, your service here at the Pentagon during the last 6 months has been exceptional, he said. Each of you has done an excellent job representing the United States Armed Service and the Honor Guard. Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberg has written letters of commendation for each of you. Copies will be included in your permanent records. Oh, yes, one more thing. I need to speak to the black guy with the big mouth. Immediately, the other guards volunteered. That's got to be Johnson. The sergeant looked at me. Airman Johnson, you need to report to the major's office immediately. As I walked to the major's office, I reviewed in my mind all the possible errors I'd made during the past few months. Major looked up from his desk when I followed his secretary into his office. Stand at attention in front of me. Yes, sir. Major eyed me thoughtfully for a moment. According to our records, you have received 4 of the Tour Guide of the Month awards handed out during the past 6 months. This is highly unusual, unheard of, actually, and the people in my office want to extend your service here at the Pentagon for a couple more months. All the additional time I'd spent searching out historical trivia had paid off. The extra enthusiasm I have put into my tours made them interesting for the visitors. As a result, I served in the Pentagon for nearly a year. Another record. I could never have brought my extra long stay at the Pentagon on my own. No matter how much I might have wanted it to happen, but God could and did. His plans for me so far had surpassed anything I might have imagined, and all he asked of me was to have faith in him. One night after returning from a 2-week leave, I checked my anemic bank account and realized that in order to make it to the end of the month and my next pay, I needed to go to the bank and withdraw cash from my savings account. The next morning, I walked to the credit union on base and withdrew $60. When I left the bank and counted my money, I brightened. I had $120. The cashier must have counted out my withdrawal twice. Great, I thought. Now I can cover all my bills. Thank you, Lord. I needed that. I walked back to the barracks feeling incredibly lucky. I forgot about the extra cash until I prepared for bed that night. I picked up my Bible and remembered the money stuffed in my wallet. It's not yours, Terry, I told myself. Of course it is. This is the way God is solving my cash flow problem. Throughout the night, I argued with my conscience. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I rushed into the bank as the doors opened for business and asked to see the teller who'd been working line 5 the day before. You mean Mrs. Taylor, the older woman replied. She is not available right now. I persisted. I must see her. It's very important. She's in counseling right now. Well, what about? I asked. The woman looked at me indignantly. I beg your pardon? I must see the bank manager then. I'm sorry, sir, but that won't be possible either. That's who's speaking with Mrs. Taylor. Please forgive me, but I must insist. As I spoke, I rushed toward the closed door marked manager. Wait! The woman hurried after me. I'll tell him you're here. She disappeared into the office, closing the door behind her. The bank manager appeared a short time later. He looked irritated with me for interrupting his meeting. Behind him stood, tear-faced, the teller who had served me the day before. Sir, the manager began, I'm too busy right now to. I placed the envelope containing the extra $60 into his hand. This won't take much time, sir. I believe this money is yours. Before I could complete my explanation, Mrs. Taylor ran to hug me. Thank you. Thank you so much. If you'd been 10 minutes later, I would have been fired. The teller sobbed. I need this job so desperately to support my year-old baby. My husband walked out on me 3 months ago. God bless you. God bless you. How come, how close I'd come to wrecking this young woman's career. I learned a lot about myself and my God that morning. How easy it would have been to keep the money and justify to myself that it was okay for me to do so. And about my God. I learned that He doesn't reward one of His children by injuring another. 3 days later, the honor guard commander called me into his office and read me the letters he'd received from Mrs. Taylor and the bank manager. You have done the honor guard proud, son. I've placed the letters in your permanent file. At the next commander's call, the officer told the entire unit about the letters and then presented me with a step promotion, one that is seldom awarded during peacetime. Promotion allowed me to attend NCO, non-commissioned officer training school, which would allow me to advance to the rank of sergeant. In just the first month's paycheck increased amounted almost to the penny what I'd almost kept from the bank. Why worry? In his book, My Utmost for His Highest, Oswald Chambers wrote, all fretting and worrying comes from calculating without God. All my worrying hadn't solved my problem. But if God can cover an IRS bill with a coin in a fish's mouth, he can certainly take care of my daily needs. God said, let not your heart be troubled. And he didn't mean just about money. He needed to teach me not to worry about any aspect of my life, including personal safety. Between my military service and college, I took a job as an inner city youth Bible worker in southeast Washington, D.C., then known as one of the heaviest drug use and crime areas in the United States. The assignment matched the one I had done in Portland while a teenager. I would knock on people's doors and ask them their needs if I could do anything for them. However, my attitude differed from when I was in my teens. Now I truly wanted to help the people I met. One morning I knocked on a door in a housing project, a rough neighborhood. As I waited for an answer, I felt that someone was watching me. The door opened enough to allow a rifle barrel to slide through, aimed directly at my chest. A cold, calculating voice behind the door said, I don't know who you are, but if you move, I'll shoot you. I stiffened and considered backing away until I felt a second gun pressed against my back. Scared? You know I was scared. Worried? Oh, yeah. I took a deep breath and prayed. Suddenly, I said something out loud that shocked my two assailants and me. Let go and let God take control. The guy inside the house opened the door and looked at me as if I was crazy. I'd unwittingly knocked on the door of the neighborhood's head drug lord. The man growled. What did you say? I gulped and repeated myself. He jabbed the gun into my chest. Man, what in the world are you talking about? I could shoot you right now. Well, sir, I've learned that when I face difficult situations, God wants me to turn it all over to Him, and that's just what I did. Are you saying that God is going to get you out of this jam you're in? Friend, I'm simply realizing that there is nothing I can do. If you want to shoot me, I can't do anything about it. But if God doesn't want you to shoot me, you won't be able to. Is that a challenge? Before I could reply, the man at my back jabbed his gun against my backbone. Man, we need to hurry up and get rid of him. I braced myself for the bullet. Instead, the man in front of me lowered his rifle and squinted up at me. You must be one of those Christians. Yes, sir, I am. And I'm here in the neighborhood to find people who might have specific needs that I and my organization might be able to fill. Man wrinkled his face and waved the gun in the air. Go on, get out of here. I don't want to see you anymore. The next morning, when I returned to the neighborhood, I learned that the word had gone out. Don't mess with the young black Bible worker while he's working our turf. You let him do his thing. Punks, drug dealers, and prostitutes obeyed the guy's warning, even though my presence hurt their business. As a result, I could go anywhere and talk to anyone in the neighborhood in total safety. Did I change this man's mind? Hardly. If I'd been on my own, I would have either fainted or screamed for the police. Both actions would have ended in a much less desirable way. No fear. Kids feared Kids wear t-shirts and baseball caps blazoned with these two brave words. Yet they walk the streets of their neighborhoods in constant terror for their lives. God has the answer for that fear. I know. I've seen it work.